For a long time now, you've asked me to make a Nekros guide, and now that I finally got my drip set up, that's exactly what we're gonna do, because in 2025, Nekros is better than he's ever been. However, he also has undeniable problems that will cost you a lot of damage if you don't know about it. So, in today's Warframe guide, we're gonna take a look at how to build Nekros right. Big shoutouts to all our generous channel members as always, and now, let's jump right into it. And jumping into it, we do with a disclaimer again. I kind of feel like I'm doing this a lot recently. Anyway, what I wanted to say is this is a pre-produced video because when you see this, I'm already in Canada for TennoCon, which will happen next weekend. So in case you became a new channel member in the last couple of days and don't show up on the list, or there has been any changes to the Nekros mechanics we're going to talk about in this video over the last couple of days, I'm going to try my best to keep you updated in the pinned comment. I don't think that there will be any updates to his stuff, but I wanted to let you know regardless. But now, let's get back on topic, talking about Nekros skills, because that's what we usually do, starting out with the passive, and this one clearly shows that he's a bit of an older Warframe, because what it does is, whenever an enemy dies in a radius of 10 meters around you, you and your companions will regenerate 5 health. Yeah, that is not all too useful, and what's more is, this heal apparently also doesn't trigger Archon Intensify. It is what it is, I guess. Nekros' first active ability is called, if you want to use a helmet ability, put it in here. Sorry, it's called Soul Punch, sorry. And what this does is, you punch an enemy and you ragdoll them away. That's literally it. If the enemy is lower than 25% of the maximum health, it will instantly take them out and spawn a shadow clone that will fight alongside you. But all in all, I personally can't see a single use for this ability. If you have a suggestion, then feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Always curious to hear your input on these type of things. Overall though, this is by far your weakest ability. That's why I don't want to talk about it all too much. If you want to use a helmet, definitely put it into here. There's also an augment though, which allows you to use this Soul Punch ability to instantly revive a fallen comrade. But then again, we're still talking about a game where you have 5 or so revives per mission, all while at the same time your teammates can literally phase out of reality while reviving you so nobody can interrupt them. I don't think this is necessary at all. Ability number 2 is called Terrify, and this luckily is finally where the kit starts to pick up because it is a very good ability. What it does is pretty simple. You cast it, and then in an area around you, enemies will have their armor reduced, and, just like the name suggests, they will be terrified, meaning they will actively start running away from you so that they can't even attack you. This, in my opinion, is the most convenient armor stripping method in the entire game because it is a quick one-time cast and it is in a 360-degree area around you. Just in case you wanted to know, at 167% ability strength, this will instantly full strip. However, if you're using Corrosive Projection as an aura mod to already reduce enemy armor, then you will only need 137% ability strength. Both of these figures, I think, are easily achievable. Just one thing to note here, not every enemy in the game can be affected by Terrify. That's a little bit of a downside, because in comparison to other armor stripping abilities, like for example Steinex's Tharo Strike, Terrify is the most limited, so to speak, so that certain bosses and elite enemies will just ignore it. Now, Terrify also has an augment called Creeping Terrify, and at base it doesn't sound all too amazing, just makes it that enemies who are terrified get slowed at the same time. But I think this is actually a really good thing to have, because in most mission types you actually want to take out the enemies. So if they're constantly running away from you, it's kind of inconvenient. And with Creeping Terrify, there is absolutely no escape. Just one thing that I wanted to mention before we go on to the next skill, no matter if you use Creeping Terrify or not, if you're playing Nekros as a gun platform where you want to go for precise headshots, then Terrify is actually not that great of a skill. The enemies will turn away from you, making it significantly more difficult to hit their heads. So with Nekros, I would generally recommend either going for melees or for weapons that don't specifically want to go for headshots. Ability number 3 is called Desecrate, and man oh man is this his signature ability. If you take a look at the text dump in the wiki, you can already see this does quite a lot, so let's get into it. What Desecrate does is, it's a channel ability, you turn it on, and then whenever an enemy dies in your area, then Desecrate has a chance of re-rolling their entire loot pool. So what happens here is, and that is very important to differentiate, you do not increase the chance of an enemy dropping loot, you're re-rolling the entire loot table, making it that an enemy effectively gets looted twice. This leads to funny interactions like, for example, with the Corpus Oxium Ospreys, who always have a 100% chance of dropping Oxium on death, where other Warframes that increase percentage chances of loot can't get more loot out of it because it's already at 100%. However, Nekros, re-rolling the entire loot table, can actually get 2 Oxium drops out of one single Osprey. And as if that's not cool enough, Nekros' looting ability also stacks with most other looting abilities in the game, like Avara's Prowl, like Atlas's Orgaze, like Hydroid's Pilfering Swarm, Korra's Pilfering Strangledome, and Wukong's Monkey Luck. The only thing that Nekros doesn't stack with is other Nekroses and the Chaser Kubro with its Retrieve mod. So, what does that mean for you? Well, long story short, that means if you want to farm as many resources as possible, you ideally want to build a team where you have a Nekros in combination with any type of other loot frames, ideally though Korra, because enemies that get taken out while being in her Pilfering Strangledome also get dismembered so that they get cut into 2 pieces, which leads to another very funky mechanic with Nekros, and that is that you don't only re-loot the enemy itself, but if they get cut into 2 pieces, then each of those 2 pieces counts as a single enemy, meaning you can re-roll the loot dice twice on a single enemy. However, you don't even need Korra for that. You could, for example, also go for a weapon with a lot of status chance and slash, which also increases the chance that enemies will get cut. Or, and that is the best friend of every Nekros player, equip your Nekros with the Ripcast in your melee slot and use the Ripcast specific Amalgam mod right here, because this will make it that all of your weapons and most abilities in the game are guaranteed to dismember enemy bodies on death. So that is the perfect synergy with Nekros getting you even more loot. Just make sure that you don't trigger too many cold status effects, because when enemies are frozen, they are prohibited from being dismembered, so that's ideally an element that you want to avoid. Now, so much for the looting part of this ability. However, that is not all. Even though it is a channeled ability, it is still possible to use stuff like Energy Siphon to regain energy per second, which is usually not a thing on channeled abilities, but for Desecrate it apparently is. Not that you need it though, because Desecrate also has a very nice augment called Despoil, which makes it that instead of energy, you now use your health to reloot the enemies, making it much easier to keep this whole thing up, and you also don't really need to worry about dying, because with all the relooting that has taken place, you will be showered in health orbs. Should be enough in most cases to just keep you alive solely on that alone. And finally, let's talk about his 4th ability, Shadows of the Dead, and this skill kind of hurts me. It really does. See, on paper, this sounds really cool and turns Nekros into this almighty necromancer type of guy. You revive up to 7 enemies that you previously took out as undead shadows that will then fight alongside you against the enemy. Depending on your ability strength, these shadows will have their health and damage output increased, and while they are definitely not bad, and in 2025 we have the most options we've ever had as to how you can buff them, their overall performance compared to companions and compared to other summoner warframes with their summons is unfortunately still not all that good. So the reason most people use them is actually for the augment, which is called Shield of Shadows, and this one is pretty nice. It connects your shadows to you with like an energy band, and up to 90% of the damage that you're taking will be redirected equally towards all linked shadows. This is very great because it provides you with another layer of up to 90 whopping % damage reduction, making Nekros a very tanky warframe. Now, I don't want to get too deep into my issues with the Shadows of the Dead right here, because we're going to have a full chapter at the end of the video where I talk about what Nekros' problems are and how to potentially fix them, so we're going to get back to that in a couple minutes. And as always, leave a like or Nekros is going to soul punch your ramen noodles off the table. Thanks so much for your support and good appetite. Now, let's take a look at what you're probably here on this video for, and that would be the builds. In this video, I have 2 different builds prepared. Number 1 is your standard weapons platform build, which I have in 2 versions, a normal one and one that is specifically made for looting runs. And then the second build is purely focusing on not doing anything yourself, don't scratch those nails, but rather let all your NPC friends handle the enemies for you. Let's start out though with the weapons platform build. And as per usual, the first thing I want to talk about here would be your helmet options, where one thing that definitely makes sense would be Grendel's Nourish. I know, standard pick, right? But especially on Nekros, it is very helpful, because not only does it help with your energy and give you additional viral damage, no, if you cast it while your shadows are on the field, then they will also be imbued with this effect, meaning when enemies hit your shadows, they too will trigger this viral AoE explosion, and because you're having a lot of shadows on the field, that means you will achieve passive viral priming in the entire room without you having to do anything. If you don't go for a Panzer Wolfpfeiler as your companion to do the viral priming, then this is your best option. However, if you do go for the Wolfpfeiler, there's not so much of a need to go for Nourish. In that case, you might prefer Roar, which I don't think I have to explain, right? Universal faction damage bonus, greatest damage buffing ability in the game, but especially if you want to go into very high-level content, like Archimedia for example, you might find that Nekros is still a little bit squishy even with the Shield of Shadows augment, and in that case, Mirage's Eclipse or Nova's Nullstar would be a great substitute because both of them give you an additional layer of 75% more damage reduction. But of course, these are just my suggestions. When we're talking about the Archon shards, then one thing you definitely want to have is 2 Archon shards into casting speed. I just made them normal ones because I wanted to save up on the Tau ones, but if you have 2 yellow Tau Forge to spare, then I would recommend maybe rather going for those as well, because especially your 4th ability has a very long casting animation. The rest is pretty much up to personal preference, but I like to go for 2 blues to increase our maximum energy. Energy in and of itself is not that much of a problem for Nekros, but I didn't really have the mod space for Flow, so I rather outsourced that to the shards. If you put Flow on him, of course, the last 3 slots, do with them whatever you like. But now, let's get to the weapons platform build, where we have a healthy mix of duration, range, and strength, which we kinda sort of all need. In the Aura and Exilus, go for whatever you like. I just chose Growing Power and Cunning Drift, but they are not necessary. Because Nekros has a relatively high base shield value, what I did is I actually didn't go for armor and health, but instead just went for Primed Redirection, focusing on only shield tanking in combination with Adaptation to give us another layer of damage reduction. With the shields and Adaptation and your Shield of Shadows augment, which we're gonna have right here, you're gonna have so much damage reduction you don't even need to health tank in the first place in most content. Then, next, to save up on some energy, I went for the Death Spoil Augment 2 so that we cast this one here with our health instead of energy. If you wanted to, and if your energy economy is good, you could leave this one out and replace it with something else. I just find it more convenient. And then the energy economy is naturally going to come from Equilibrium, which is a no-brainer on Nekros, because with the additional loot, you're going to get so many health orbs. Equilibrium is going to shower you in energy. Now, the ability strength is going to come from Growing Power, Blind Rage, and Arcane Kamisado. This build doesn't really focus on the damage that your shadow clones do, but because of the fact that they attack the enemy regardless, this will pretty much have Arcane Kamisado at max stacks all the time, giving you 60% more ability strength. And in the second Arcane slot, I kept this a bit open. You can actually use whatever you like. I went for Mold Efficiency though, because it gives you more ability duration when you have shields, and because we're going to be so tanky, we're pretty much always going to have at least some shields, giving us additional duration, which is always convenient. Lastly, for the range, I only went for Stretch and Cunning Drift because, to be honest, right, 24 meters of armor strip is already pretty good, and then for the loot range, we're already at 40 meters at 160% range. That is very high, and to be fair, if you make it much bigger, then you're gonna have the ability to, yes, loot enemies that are very far away, but chances are that you can't even hit enemies so far away. So there's a bit of a trade-off going on here, sure, but I don't think we need to go all that much into range. However, in case you disagree on that take, I also have a second version of this build called Range Loot, where we have more range, switched a couple of mods around. Overall, the build functions the same way as before, but this time we have 47 meters, which should be enough in every situation, except maybe you're in the Plains of Eidolon with a sniper rifle and you want to loot the enemies that you snipe or something. But yeah, this is good. You can totally use that. But in case you're one of the 3 people on this planet who don't primarily play Nekros for the looting ability, but rather because they really like necromancers, then this second build will resonate much more with you because this right here is the necromancer summoner focused build. First of all, also here, let's take a look at some Helminth abilities, and while the options here are very similar to the previous build, one thing that is very funny here would be Desecration from Inaros with the Desecration's Curse augment, because with that you can not only have 7 shadows on the field, but you can have additional sandcats on the field too, which is going to give you so many summons. It's just really hilarious. Use this one for the memes, not necessarily for the meta. For the Archon charts here, the exact same thing counts as before, but maybe if you want to focus on the summoning even more, you might want to maybe even dedicate 3 yellows to casting speed, simply because of the fact that casting your 4th ability takes that long. Now, when we're talking about the summoner build, the first thing I want to mention are the arcanes, because there is something special going on here. First of all, naturally, we go for Arcane Kamisado, giving us 60% more ability strength. Because of the fact that most enemies have fully automatic weapons, this will scale up very quickly, and it's very convenient overall. But in the second Arcane slot, I would not go for something that gives more ability strength, because ability strength only does so much for your summons. Instead, I went for the craziest buff on all types of summons in the game, that being Theorem Infection. This arcane is very, very unpopular, very rarely used, so just in case you're wondering what the heck is going on, let me play a quick clip from a recent Oraxia video where I already explained how exactly this works. Now, the way that you trigger Theorem Infection is a little bit special, because in order to do that, you need to run a kit gun, which doesn't matter as long as it can kill enemies, and equip one of the 4 residual arcanes to that kit gun. These residual arcanes are kit gun only, and the way they work is pretty similar across the board. If you take out an enemy with the kit gun, they will create somewhat of an AoE around the enemy, and standing in that AoE will then stack up the Theorem Infection arcane on your Warframe. My personal favorite here would be Residual Shock, because I feel that the AoE of this is just longer lasting and bigger than the others, but of course, you do you. So yeah, long story short, if you use a kit gun with a residual arcane to stack up Theorem Infection onto Oraxia, your scuttlers are going to do ridiculous damage. However, there is one bug that I need to point out here, and that is that seemingly, once you reach the max stacks on Theorem Infection, you can't refresh them anymore, and if it runs out, it just disappears completely and you can't even get it back. This is a bug that has been in the game, I think, for years. However, it is just that, a UI bug. Even if this buff icon disappears from your screen, the buff from Theorem Infection will still be on, and the arcane duration is still going to be re-triggered by standing in the AoE from the residual arcane. It's just not going to show up on the HUD, which, yeah, is unfortunate. Just wanted to make that very clear. It does work, it just doesn't look like it. But yeah, these right here would be the 2 arcanes. Let's get to the mods, where in the aura, of course, we're going to go for Summoner's Wrath, giving even more strength to our summons. And then the rest of the build is mostly focused on range. I know previously I said that range isn't all that important, right? The radius is way too big here already, but the reason why we have so much range here is the Nourish explosions, which now have a 24-meter radius. That is very convenient, making sure that the viral priming is really happening. And of course, for the survivability, we also go for Primed Redirection, Shield of Shadows. This time I didn't go for Adaptation because there was just no space on this build. It should be tanky enough though regardless. And here I also use Creeping Terrify as an augment to make sure that the enemies can't really run away from our summons, making it easier for them to actually hit them. What is really important though for this build would be our companion, because as I also said in the skills section already, your shadow clones, no matter how much you buff them, they're just not all that amazingly strong. So what I decided to do here is rather focus on my companion to deal the damage for me over the shadow clones, and this is the companion that I used for that. It's the Pharaoh Predicide, which in my opinion is probably the strongest companion out there. This right here is the build. Most of this is not incredibly important. The only thing that you really want to have is Contagious Bond, because it makes it that when your companion takes out an enemy, 50% of the status effects on that enemy will spread to nearby enemies, which can lead to crazy room nuking chain reactions. The rest is of course up to personal preference. If you want the companion to deal more damage, you can weave in as many hunter mods as you can, because the set bonus makes it that your companion deals more damage to enemies that have slash on them. That is pretty darn nice. And one reason why I like the Pharaoh Predicite so much are the 2 precept mods, Endoparasitic Vector and Anabolic Pollination. Those are very, very good. This one increases your overall damage even more, and this one viral primes the enemy too, so the whole room is showered in viral. For the companion claws, we have a standard companion claw setup with bite, with maul, with more slash damage, with heat damage, very important, because heat is just the strongest option for companion damage. And then the rest is just, standard stuff that you put on companion claws to make them really, really beefy. Now, I think this is the best way to build Nekros as a summoner Warframe. However, now comes the part of the video that I have teased earlier where I am going to nag and yap, because unfortunately, compared to other Warframes, Nekros just also isn't all that much of a good summoner. Let me explain. As you saw in the build, we went for Summoner's Wrath, Arcane Camisado, and even for Theorem Infection to buff the ever-living crap out of your Shadow clones. We viral primed the enemies, we completely removed their armor, and still, in some missions, my Shadows of the Dead only deal like 1,000 damage per hit, which is essentially nothing. But the thing here is that this isn't really a numbers issue, because even if they were to buff up the damage of your Shadow clones by 10 times, they would still suffer from one problem that I don't really see a solution for right now, and that is the enemy AI. Because even though the Shadow clones fight on your side, they still have the same AI that also the enemies have, and while you usually don't notice it all that much as a player, once you start relying on NPCs to fight for you, you'll see that these guys rather do anything else but attack the enemy. They barely ever get more than 3 hits or so into the same target before some sort of interruption happens. In my opinion, for Shadows of the Dead to be viable summons, just make them way more aggressive. I mean, take a look at Caliban summons. They are so bloodthirsty, it even kind of scares me. So, since the summons don't work all too well, we can instead use a companion to do the damage for us because, companions are very darn strong, I think we all know that. But there's a problem with this too. First of all, for a companion to wipe entire rooms, we of course need Contagious Bond, making it so that if enemies have status effects on them, on death, 50% of those status effects will spread to nearby enemies. This is one of the craziest room nukes in the game. The second instinct would be to go for Duplex Bond, turning your 1 nuking companion into 4, but this is actually not recommended because Duplex Bond companions can't trigger Contagious Bond, meaning they actively steal the kills from your original companion who could do that, leading to overall less room nuking potential. And if you now think, well, I'm just gonna go for Roar then we have the next problem. And that is, if your companion is so strong that they just one-hit the enemy, then that enemy is also not going to spread anything, even if the companion applied a status effect with that hit. Yep, that's right. If you want an enemy to spread status effects through Contagious Bond, then these status effects must have been on the enemy before they take the final blow, meaning you have to make sure that your companion becomes artificially weaker and doesn't one-hit them right away. And because this is a pre-produced video, I have no idea what the algorithm will recommend you in the end screen right here, but just click it anyway because I'm sure it will be absolute cinema. Another massive shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Turtle Pier, Ondakanya 2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawky, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Morazaki, Shadow Lockhart, Trolloloxen, Hantagas, Bait Crusader, Christopher S. Mawson, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot and don't forget to tune in TennoCon.